Hello YouTube. In your adventures across Tamriel you'll use all sorts of weaponry, from swords to bows and staves. But did you know that in the Elder Scrolls lore we can actually find quite a few schools of martial arts? And today I want to give you a bit of an insight into what kind of unarmed martial arts exist on Tamriel. There are some martial arts in this video which utilize weapons, but we'll mostly be talking about unarmed ones or hand-to-hand combat. So with that being said, let's see what lore there is on Tamriel's martial arts. Alright, so while every citizen of Tamriel knows that making a fist and then hitting your opponent with it hurts them, we are interested here in this video in specific schools of fighting or martial arts which implement unarmed hand-to-hand fighting like judo and karate in our own world. Now, it may come to no surprise that the Khajiit are the most developed culture in the lore when it comes to unarmed martial arts. They have claws, which they regularly use in combat, which often give unarmed combat bonuses, so it comes to no surprise that Bethesda has developed the Khajiit far more when it comes to the lore of unarmed martial arts, as the Khajiit have several different styles of unarmed combat or claw dances. But that being said, there is criminally little lore on the other cultures in that regard. But I definitely found some info on the other races after digging very deep into some dialogue and lore books, so let's tackle those first and then talk about the main part, which will be the Khajiit. Now, first of all, there's a Redguard school of unarmed fighting, or a martial arts school if you will, which is called the Cycle of Blood. It's a fighting style which makes use of a long setup during the fight. Apparently, the one utilizing the Cycle of Blood fights in such a way that they slowly build up to a situation where their opponent makes a mistake and then is then essentially trapped, making it so that they can finish their opponent with 3 quick strikes. It's a complicated way of fighting, presumably requiring a lot of skill and experience in order to pull off correctly. Other than that, we don't really know anything about the Cycle of Blood. We don't even know what 3 moves those ending moves are or how they trap their opponent, but that's everything we know about the Redguard school of fighting or martial arts. But the Cycle of Blood for the Redguards is not the only school of unarmed fighting present in the lore. We also have the so-called Way of the Exposed Palm, which is practiced in Cyrodiil, so presumably is Imperial in its origin. We don't really know which culture produced the Way of the Exposed Palm, but this school of fighting relies on, instead of using your fist, opening your hand and thus exposing the palm and then hitting your opponent with the side of the hand or even individual fingers, delivering precise and pointed strikes with as much force behind them as a fist strike. The Way of the Exposed Palm thus makes use of the physics principle that the pressure acting on an object, in this case your opponent, depends on the force that is applied, divided by the size of the area that the force is applied to on the body. By using the side of the hand or even a single finger, you make the area that you hit smaller, but if you keep the force the same as you would when using your fist, the pressure that the opponent is confronted with will be bigger and thus more effective. Now, this school of fighting relies on extreme precision, concentration, speed and control of one's movements. Masters in this way of fighting are said to be able to just use their pinky finger to deliver devastating blows to their opponents. Pretty cool, but also pretty weird. Now, we also know that the Nords apparently have a martial school of unarmed fighting, which is centered around being able to block the strikes of the opponents that are coming in, but we don't have a name for that school of fighting, nor do we know much about it, other than that it's centered around blocking. Just how we know nothing about Akaviri martial arts, because we know that the Akaviri have schools of unarmed martial fighting, grouped as Akaviri martial arts, but that's really all we know, just a single mention of it without any further explanation. The only additional thing that we know about the Akaviri martial arts is that they are apparently based upon dodging of your opponent's strikes instead of blocking their strikes, so it's different from the Nords in that way, but we don't know anything in terms of movesets. Now, we also know that Cyrodiil's Order of the Ancestor Moth, so the Order of Moth Priests, actually have their own martial arts school, called the Way of the Peacfull Fist, which likely involves knocking someone out without doing too much damage to them physically, going off the name. Because we unfortunately don't know much about this martial arts school, other than that the Order of the Ancestor Moth teaches it to young initiates of the Order, so that they can defend the old and blind priests from threat. Which is pretty cool, because obviously these old priests are defenseless when they're blind after reading many Elder Scrolls. And that's basically it. That's all the lore that we have on the unarmed schools of fighting that are not originating from the Khajiit. Everything else in this video will be centered around the Khajiit, who have a whole range of unarmed martial arts, and with good reason, as they have their claws, which can substitute for their weapons in many cases. Now, therefore, instead of calling them schools of fighting or martial arts, the Khajiit call their martial arts claw dances, and there are several different types or schools of claw dances which have been developed over the years. Each of the types of Khajiit claw dances has their own following, with entire monasteries and orders of priests dedicated to preserving them and teaching them. The funny thing is that most priests in these temples and monasteries do not practice these martial arts or claw dances as a literal martial art meant for fighting, but rather as a form of meditation in motion, with most claw dances having set patterns of moves which can be repeated to serve as a way of meditating in motion. In fact, the claw dances themselves originated with the monks in these monasteries, who in ancient times sought for ways to fight back against the ancient Khajiiti warlord, the tyrant Tenzin the Striped Death, who attacked the temples, exiling the monks of ancient elsewhere. He drove the monks from the cities, and after almost a century in which the monks in exile had continually practiced their motion of meditation and perfected them into fighting styles or claw dances, they returned to the cities and towns of elsewhere. They then taught their motion meditation ways, now developed into martial arts, to the people of elsewhere, so that the people could fight back against the tyrant and the other oppressors in elsewhere at the time. The claw dances inspired massive peasant uprisings, peasants who now had effective ways to fight back against their oppressors. Now, these peasants and monks and their descendants over the years never forgot the power that they could wield with the claw dances, which freed them from their oppressors in the past, and thus the claw dances were passed on from generation to generation into modern day elsewhere. Now, from the lore we learn of the existence of 4 types of claw dances which have survived from ancient times. First is the Way of the Whispering Claw, then we have Gout Fang, we have Desert Wind and Desert Rain. Now, we know that all employ a great amount of discipline in the users, and the use of the claws of the Khajiit to a degree in their fighting styles, so not only weapons, with some combining weapons into the claw dances and some using no weapons in the claw dances. Now, let's begin with Whispering Claw, or Ziskura in the language of the Khajiit. Video on that language, by the way, is in the description of the video if you want to know more about the language of the Khajiit. Now, Whispering Claw is a fighting style of fast and silent movement. It requires fast reflexes and a good balance and control of one's body, as it employs advanced jumps and acrobatics in its fighting style. It's ideal for killing and can be used effectively in silence while sneaking around, meaning that this specific fighting style is often chosen by assassins. The Whispering Claw style is the polar opposite of the second style, Gout Fang or Vrin Tak in the Khajiiti language. While it's also fast-paced like the Whispering Claw, it relies on the strength of the wielder instead of speed and silence. Gout Fang includes kicking, punching, grappling, and in some cases can be effectively complemented by weapon use, although only masters can effectively combine the unarmed side of the fighting style with weapon use without getting sloppy in their style, since effective use of Gout Fang requires proper coordination of one's body and proper concentration. It is a claw dance which is very much based on instinct and interpreting the flow of energy in the body, as it does not have set patterns of sets of moves which belong together, meaning that it relies largely on the moment and on improvisation. Since it has no fixed set of moves, it also means that to become a true Gout Fang master, just a study of moves and move patterns isn't enough. Rather, one needs to master their own body and the energy flows within themselves to call themselves a true master of Gout Fang and to know which moves when to use. Now, finally, we have the styles of the Desert Wind and Desert Rain left in terms of Khajiiti claw dances. These are both only half unarmed, as both heavily integrate weapons into their fighting style. While both use the claws, they can only be used effectively in combination with weapons for these two fighting styles. In fact, Desert Rain almost exclusively uses swords, with the only exception being agile kicks being integrated into the fighting style. Desert Wind, while also using weapons, apparently uses the paw claws of the Khajiit to a far larger degree, integrating them seamlessly with weapon use. I have to admit, we don't know much about either, except for the names and their degree of weapon use in complement with the claws and feet, but the exact moves of these styles are unknown, or what their movesets rely on. Now, one final thing that we know is that by the Third Era, around the time of Morrowind, those who dispute the teachings of the Tribunal, the Dissident priests, have their own styles of unarmed fighting for personal defense, apparently developing their own unarmed fighting styles called Golden Reed, Saltris and Marshmallow, which they strangely decided to name after some of Morrowind's most common foods. The reason why I group these with the Khajiit fighting styles is because the Dissident priests developed these fighting styles out of the existing Khajiiti fighting styles, as the priests copied the movements of the Khajiit. Now, just like the Desert Wind and Desert Raiden style, we have no idea what types of moves these fighting styles employ or what they rely on. But considering that they're described as unarmed styles, we can assume that they're based on the Whispering Claw and Goutfang style, as these both largely do not employ weapon use and rely on the claws and limbs of the Khajiit. That being said, that's basically all I can say about the martial arts on Tamriel. That's just literally all the lore that we have, other than one little piece of lore that at some point someone developed a fighting style specifically to combat vampires, which employs some moves which are unarmed, but I don't know whether or not that really counts for this video, since it also apparently uses bows and spears, so I'm not sure. By the way, now that you're still here, last week I made this video on Marsh Giants of Tamriel. Really cool and really obscure part of the Elder Scrolls lore, but YouTube just refuses to recommend it to you guys according to the analytics, so let me recommend it to you here. If you haven't seen it and want more Elder Scrolls lore, a link to that video is in the description, just like the link for the video on Khajiiti language. Now, all that rests me is to thank you for watching. I hope that you learned something new today about the Elder Scrolls lore, and if you did, maybe consider returning next weekend when I probably make another video. And all that rests me now is to vocally thank my top Patreon supporters: Mr. Bernardo Binda, Gabriel Binda, Polo Espetin, Athena Iodis, Volkjor of Argonia, King Chris, Bolch, Scrub of the Scrolls, Doji, Fenrir, Sword of Bushido, Rakai, Zarmikal, and Mr. Christmas. It's thanks to all these people and all the others on screen that this channel stays alive, and for that I'm very grateful. That said, I hope to see all of you in the next Elder Scrolls lore video. Bye bye.